He walked into the hangar without a name badge, without rank, without ribbons or polished brass. There was no ceremony in his step, no authority in his uniform, just a faded green jacket with a ripped seam at the shoulder and boots worn down to the leather from years of ground. No man should have survived the wind outside, howled against the metal walls, as the team inside paused mid-motion. Some with coffee halfway to their lips, others halfway through a push-up. Everyone froze when he appeared, and though no one said a word, every man in the room knew something had shifted, like the air grew heavier, or maybe it was the silence that said more than sound could say, because these men trained to kill, trained to survive, trained to obey, knew, instinctively, that the figure before them needed no introduction, no salute, no orders to command their full attention. They called him different names in different corners of the team's ghost operator, Revenant, the man with no name, but most simply. Called him brother, not out loud and not often because there was a weight to it, like saying it aloud invited something you weren't prepared to carry. He hadn't been seen in years, not since the night in Kandahar, the night no one wrote down and no one ever talked about unless it was just past midnight and the bourbon bottle was mostly empty. And even then, it was never more than a few sentences, followed by a long pause and a stare into space, like the memory cost something too deep to explain. Kandahar was supposed to be a routine mission. Intel said there were 4 tangos in a 2-story compound arms, dealing nothing unusual, nothing big enough for concern, but Intel lied. Or maybe someone wanted it to be wrong because when the team dropped in, they didn't find 4 tangos. They found an army RPGs in every window, PKMs on every rooftop, a kill box disguised as an easy target. The blackbird circling above watched the whole thing go to hell, but the feed cut out after the first explosion and no one knew how or why, just that within 20 minutes every comm went silent and no backup ever arrived. But someone did. When the sun rose the next day, 7 men crawled into a forward operating base, 3 barely walking 2, carried the others, and none had functioning radios. The medics rushed out expecting them to be delirious or near death, but each one said the same thing when asked how they got out. He came for us, and when pressed, they said nothing more. Just that. He came for them, and they were alive because of it. His name was redacted from every after-action report, his presence scrubbed from the records. The bird logs said he never left the base. The sat feeds mysteriously corrupted. No one in command had answers, and no one in the field asked because they knew better. There are truths too heavy for paper, too wild for courtrooms, truths that live only in the eyes of those who carry them, and his was one of them. Now here he was again, walking into the hangar like he belonged there, like no time had passed, like the world had not turned over in his absence. A few younger guys, new blood with high-speed, low-drag attitudes straight from buds, looked at him with confusion, unsure whether to challenge or salute their hesitation, betrayed their inexperience, but the older ones, the men who'd been downrange more times than they could count, they didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink, because they remembered the stories and they knew those stories were true. One man stepped forward, an old team lead with a limp and a scar running from jaw to collarbone. He extended a hand not for a shake, but as a gesture of acknowledgement, and the man in green nodded once. Slowly, their eyes locked for just a second, but it was enough to transfer years of pain, loss, and respect between them, a conversation in silence that outsiders would never understand. Then the man turned and continued through the hangar past racks of weapons and gear lockers, past weight benches and climbing ropes straight to the back, where a sealed steel door led to a private briefing room used only for the darkest missions, the ones that never got written down. No one had told him to go there. No orders were given. No texts or calls or messages, and yet he walked there like he knew what was waiting. Like he had been summoned by something deeper than orders, like instinct or fate, or something darker that pulled him toward the unknown. Inside that room, 3 men waited, 2 in uniform, 1 in civilian dress. But it was clear who held power. None of them spoke when he entered. Not at first, they just watched him pull the chair back and sit without asking, and they let him because they knew who he was, even if the files didn't say his name anymore, even if their bosses warned them not to acknowledge his existence. He sat like he owned the place, or maybe like he had nothing left to lose either way. No one objected. Finally, the man in civilian clothes leaned forward, resting both elbows on the table, his voice low but steady. "We have a situation," he said, "and we need someone who can do what no one else can do." His eyes never left the figure across the table, who simply nodded. Once. Not a yes, not a no, just a nod, like he already knew the situation before it was said, like the details didn't matter, only the outcome. There were whispers outside the room, the team wondering what mission was big enough to pull him back in, what threat required a ghost to fight it. But no answers came. The door remained closed, and the man in green remained silent until the meeting ended, and he rose, walked out with no file, no weapon, no briefing folder, just the same steady stride, the same quiet authority that turned warriors into statues and left questions hanging like smoke in the air. He didn't speak to anyone on the way out, but he paused near the door, looked back over the hangar once more, his eyes scanning the room like he was memorizing faces or maybe saying goodbye. Then he was gone, just like that. No one followed. No one dared. And though the room came back to life slowly, with whispered questions and theories, no one really knew where he went or why. What they did know, what they all felt, whether they admitted it or not, was that something had begun the moment he walked in. Something none of them could stop or explain, because when a man like that reappears, it is not by accident and it is never without consequence. And somewhere out there, something waited. Something old and buried. Something the world forgot, but he did not. The mission had gone dark before the sun even touched the horizon. They were dropped at 0300 under cloud cover with a promise of clean extraction. By sunrise, it was supposed to be fast, surgical, simple enter, confirm, eliminate, and exfil before breakfast. They moved like ghosts, as they always did, covering 2 clicks of rough terrain in complete silence, eyes scanning every shadow with the kind of calm that only came from too many deployments, too many body bags, too many nights staring into nothing while waiting for something to go wrong. Their intel was supposed to be solid, fresh off a human asset. Deep in the valley, a confirmed meeting between a local warlord and an arms runner bringing crates of Chinese rifles and stolen U.S. hardware. But what they found instead was a graveyard waiting to happen. Every rooftop held a barrel. Every alley smelled like blood before any was spilled. And before the team could spread into formation, a flash lit up the edge of the market, followed by a thunder that cracked open the ground under their feet. The lead man went down without a sound, his body catching the brunt of the shrapnel, and the others scattered, diving behind shattered walls and rusted cars with muzzle flashes, strobing the dark like a hellish dance. Their comms went down, second, not from enemy jamming, not from technical failure, but from something else, something no one could explain. The radios simply died, like the air had swallowed the signal and spat back silence. The kind of silence that did not sit right in the gut of any man on that field. No one could reach command. No one could reach each other. They were alone, in enemy territory, with no map, no drone, no birds overhead, and no idea how many they were facing, only that they were outgunned, outmanned, and surrounded on all sides. The medic tried to move, but caught a round in the leg, crawling back behind a crumbling brick archway, while the team leader radioed into nothing over and over, praying for a voice that never came. They had minutes, maybe less, and every breath was louder than the last bullets chipped away at cover and hope at the same time, and one by one. The men felt the inevitability settle in that cold, creeping whisper in the spine that said, this was it. Then he appeared. Not from the direction they came, not from the path ahead, but from the shadows to the west, where no one should have been. Not without triggering minds or alerting scouts, but he moved like shadow and silence in human form. His face was painted black and gray like ash. His eyes unreadable not from fear or rage, but from something deeper, something ancient, like he had been through this fire before and never left it. He didn't speak, didn't explain, didn't ask for orders. He simply gestured once and the team moved with him because they knew without knowing that following him was the only way they were getting. Out alive, they broke cover under fire, trusting the space he carved through chaos with each step, leading them deeper into alleyways, tunnels, and side paths. No map had ever shown like he had walked this terrain 1,000 times before, like it lived in his bones. At one point, they passed a wall with fresh markings, a warning in a dialect. None of them spoke, but he stopped, looked at it with a kind of familiarity that felt impossible, then nodded and turned left instead of right. 3 steps later, an explosion behind them proved the decision had saved their lives. He didn't flinch when the fire roared, didn't look back, didn't slow down, just kept moving with that same haunted pace, like death was chasing him and he had already outrun it once before. The sniper took a hit. Just below the ribs, dropped fast and hard, his gear clattering against the stone, but before anyone else could stop the man in ash, reached back, hoisted him onto his shoulder without losing momentum. He carried him through 300 meters of open terrain with rounds cracking past his ear and dirt flying from each impact, yet somehow not a single bullet found its mark, as if the air bent around him like even death was afraid to touch him when they reached the old sewer. Great just past the irrigation line, he pulled it open and ushered them in one by one until all 6 remaining men were inside, then dropped the injured sniper gently on the ground and sealed the hatch behind them. They sat in darkness for what felt like hours, panting, bleeding, clutching wounds and weapons with shaking hands as he crouched at the edge, eyes closed, like he was listening not to sound, but to something else, something buried deep beneath the noise of war. Eventually, the team leader asked who he was, but the man said nothing, only opened his. Command refused to acknowledge his presence, refused to admit what every man on that mission knew in his bones, that without him, they would have been names on a wall, folded flags handed to. Mothers and wives instead of breathing ghosts, carrying stories they could never tell even under oath. Because the moment you spoke his name, it felt like something shifted in the air, like some ancient force stirred beneath your feet. A force not bound by uniform or chain of command or human logic. The official record stated clearly that all assigned assets were accounted for, that no additional operatives had been deployed, that there was no possibility of any off-grid personnel involved in the extraction. And yet when the wounded sniper woke up in the med tent, the first words out of his mouth were, "He carried me. He walked through fire and death and never flinched. He looked like death itself, but somehow I felt safer in his arms than I ever did behind cover. He was not in the satellite footage, though the team swore he was in front of them. He was not listed in flight logs, though the team said he led them to a bird, not even scheduled for their recovery. He was not seen by any gate guard, though. The men said he walked out into the desert past the fence line without speaking, without saluting, without stopping. One analyst from Langley tried to dig deeper, pulled archived mission files and off-book recon rosters from ops run in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and Afghanistan, looking for anyone who matched the vague description, but every time he came close to a name, the file would be missing or corrupted or so heavily redacted. It was just black ink on white paper, and after a week the analyst's access was revoked and his desk cleared without warning. They said he violated security protocols, but his colleagues knew better. They knew he saw something, someone that wasn't supposed to exist. The nickname Revenant started. On a whisper pass through fire teams during jungle drills and desert raids spoken at night when the new guys asked about legends, men who walked through hell and came back. Different. Not like superheroes, not like ghosts, but something else. Something you could not explain, but felt when the wind went still and the moon vanished behind cloud cover. They said the Revenant only appeared when something had gone wrong, when no plan would work, when all hope was lost, and someone needed to do the impossible. Without thanks, without medals, without proof, one story came out of Mali, where a Tier 1 unit went missing during an arms raid deep in cartel country. The jungle swallowed them whole, and for 4 days no contact, no signal, no movement. Then, on the 5th night, a flare lit the sky above the extraction point, and 8 men limped out of the trees. Missing gear, bruised, broken, but alive. They never said who got them out, and the lead operator simply handed his helmet to the CO and said he was there. Again, just like Kandahar. Just like before, and the CO didn't ask anything else. Another story whispered through the halls of Coronado told of a trainee who nearly drowned during a night swim. The current too strong, the cold too deep, and his limbs stopped moving halfway through the course. The instructors called it in. But by the time they got to him, the kid was on the rocks coughing up salt water with no idea how he got there. He just kept saying someone pulled him up, someone who said nothing, and disappeared into the surf. And when they rolled back the tape, the cameras only showed waves. Even among SEALs known for silence and discipline, there was a strange reverence around the Revenant. Not fear, not admiration either, but a solemn respect. Like he was not a man, but a reckoning. Like he represented something they could not name, but all understood, and when a man like that enters a room, even high-ranking officers know better than to ask questions. They don't want the answers to the strangest part was that no one knew his real name. Some guessed he was a legend, brought to life, a composite of half-truths and battlefield myths. Others claimed he was once one of them. Maybe even a commander gone rogue or buried in deep cover for years, until the only thing left of his identity was the mission. But those who had seen him, those who had followed him through hellfire, swore he was not a story, he was real, and he knew things he should not have known. Like the team medic from the Kandahar mission, who later received an unmarked package at a temporary station in Jordan. It contained a photo from 10 years prior, showing his sister outside a train station in Prague. Unaware she was being watched, circled on the back was a date, and a time, and nothing else. 3 days later, that station was bombed by a lone wolf terrorist, but his sister was not there. She missed her train due to a sudden illness, and no one ever connected the dots, but he did, and he never spoke of the package again, or the time a Navy psychologist reviewing trauma cases from a failed op found a line scribbled in the margin of one soldier's intake form. It read, "He told me it wasn't my fault before I even said what happened, and the handwriting did not match the patient or the staff. And when she tried to trace the form, it vanished from the database entirely, along with her access credentials." There were too many coincidences, too many anomalies, too many men swearing on their lives that someone was watching from the shadows, someone who didn't want thanks or glory, someone who only stepped into the light when the world fell apart and no protocol could save it, someone who had no place in peacetime, no home in normal life, only purpose, and war and silence. So when he entered that hangar and every head turned, they didn't see a ghost. They saw a truth they couldn't bury, a reckoning they couldn't stop. And for those who had met him before, who had felt his presence when the night was darkest and the guns were empty, it was like seeing fate walk in, wearing boots covered in someone else's blood. And yet, as powerful as his presence was, no one ever really knew why he showed up, only that he did when it mattered most, and that his arrival always meant one thing. Something was coming, something too big, too deadly, too far gone for the usual tactics to fix. And when the Revenant came back from wherever he had gone, it meant the world was about to change again. Because the Revenant did not come back for comfort or closure. He came back for one reason and one reason only, to finish what no one else could. Years passed, and new recruits came and went, some full of fire and arrogance, others already broken from things they never spoke of, but all of them eventually heard the stories, the whispered ones shared only in the silence between drills or during the rare quiet moments after midnight when the air was thick with sweat and salt and the weight of unseen memories pressed into every wall of the barracks. Stories that seemed too impossible to believe, yet too detailed to be fiction, about a man with no name who appeared when the odds collapsed and left without recognition, without reward, without trace. Some of the newer guys dismissed it as myth, a scare tactic, maybe something the senior guys used to build mystique or put fear into rookies during Hell Week. But then the incident happened and everything changed, because legends don't bleed but memories do, and what happened that night was seared into the minds of everyone present, even those who refused to talk about it later. It started like any other test, a night navigation swim in cold black water with only glow sticks to mark the checkpoints. Instructors patrolled the coast, and the rookies were on their own, meant to prove their endurance, their focus, their survival instinct. But something went wrong that night. One of the candidates, a promising swimmer with clean scores and top mental toughness, went under halfway through the course and didn't resurface. The spotters missed it. At first, the moon was gone, the water rough, but then a flash of color, a ripple where there should have been stillness, and the alarms were called. The instructors moved fast, 2 divers in within seconds, infrared scanning the surface and the surrounding current, but there was nothing, no shape, no movement, no sign. Then, just as fast as it started, he was there. A figure moving through the water with no light, no fins, no sound, just a wake barely visible against the surface, and in one hand the limp form of the rookie who everyone thought had drowned. He pulled the kid up, tossed him onto the rocks, and disappeared under the waves again like the ocean had. Simply swallowed him whole. The instructors found the candidate gasping, shivering in shock but breathing, and the first thing he said was he was already there, like he knew, like he was waiting for me before it even happened. The medics rushed him to base, and the CO demanded answers, but no one had seen anything on the tapes. The camera footage showed only empty sea and a struggling trainee, no figure, no rescuer, no proof. A few days later, one of the instructors found something in his locker, a single round, the casing scorched and bent in a way that looked unnatural, like it had been crushed under impossible pressure. Wrapped around it was a note written in jagged letters that simply said, "Keep your eyes open, or next time you might miss more than just a breath." The handwriting didn't match any of the candidates. None of the instructors, and the note vanished hours later as if it had never been there. That was when the whispers grew louder, when even the skeptics started to listen and remember other moments that didn't make sense. A locker that was jammed suddenly opened during an equipment check, revealing a forgotten weapon that would have caused a failure. A sniper scope misaligned during a qualification shot, suddenly perfect when the trainee lined up again. A navigation map switched during a storm test, leading the candidate away from a live fire zone. No one admitted to helping. No one admitted to knowing, but the results were real, and the presence was felt. Some said he was watching the new blood, waiting to see if they were worthy. Others believed he was protecting them from something darker, from forces within the system that had grown too careless or too corrupt. But no one ever found his name on a roster. No one ever saw him arrive or leave. And when the commanding officers asked for explanations, all they got were shrugs and downcast eyes. Because how do you explain a ghost that bleeds? How do you report a shadow that saves lives? One night during a thunderstorm, a group of candidates huddled in the barracks trying to sleep through the noise when a power outage cut everything to black. Emergency lights failed, and the wind howled like it carried voices from somewhere far beyond the walls. Some of the younger men whispered jokes nervously. Others stayed silent. And then someone knocked 3 times on the outer door. Slow, steady, and wrong, because no one. Knocks during blackout protocol. The team lead got up, opened the door, and found nothing there. Just a folded piece of cloth on the floor, soaked from rain. And when he picked it up, he recognized it instantly. It was the blood-stained patch from a fallen teammate, a man who had died in Syria years ago, and whose personal effects were never recovered. The lead went pale, sat down without a word, and the next morning he submitted his resignation, stating only that he had seen enough to understand his place was no longer in command. The patch disappeared by noon. No one else ever saw it again. Rumors spread faster after that of a silent presence watching over the teams of unexplained saves and last-second warnings of doors that wouldn't open. Just before explosions and weapons that jammed only when they were pointed at the wrong man, and always the feeling of being watched, not by something malevolent but by someone ancient, tired, and relentless, like he could not rest until his mission, whatever it was, had ended. One veteran finally spoke during a private after-action review called in from retirement. Because his name was tied to too many near misses and perfect recoveries, he said he had seen the Revenant twice, once in the jungle, once in the city, and both times he was bleeding, moving slow, like he had been through hell but never stopped, like he had died 1,000 times, but something kept pulling him back, not out of duty, not out of vengeance, but out of something worse, something heavier, like guilt. The Admiral who heard that story said nothing, just nodded slowly and ended the review early. Later that week, the base security was tightened, not because of threats from the outside, but because someone realized the Revenant did not need to be outside to be dangerous. He could walk among them without badge or ID or weapon and still shift the balance of any mission by sheer force of presence alone. And then came the mission order, the one stamped with no return address marked urgent priority black. The kind of envelope that no one wanted to open, because they knew it was not a mission. It was a summons, and the name inside was his. Not printed, not typed, just handwritten in thick strokes across the page with the coordinates of a location no one recognized and no other instructions. The CO placed the envelope on the desk in the main operations room and walked away, and when the others returned later, it was gone. No trace, no recording, no sign of access, but they all knew he had taken it, and whatever lay at those coordinates would be changed forever by the time the sun rose again. Because when the Revenant answered a call, it was never just a mission, it was a reckoning, and wherever he went, the silence followed. Now here he was again in the room where the air was thick with respect unspoken, where the men wore medals and rank and ribbons polished so bright they caught the light like stars fallen to earth. But all that glitter seemed to dim when he stepped in, because this man wore none of it, carried none of the symbols, yet somehow seemed heavier than them all, as if the weight he bore was something no metal could represent, something forged in fire and failure and things no record could contain. The Admiral had been speaking a briefing on an upcoming deployment, a high-risk op with moving targets in unstable territory, something complicated and ugly and wrapped in politics and silence, and just as he finished the last line of command protocol, he looked up and stopped mid-breath, his eyes landing on the man standing at the back near the door, leaning against the wall like he had been there for hours, like he had heard everything without being seen. The room went quiet, not in fear, but in recognition. The kind of silence that only comes when every man in uniform knows they are in the presence of someone who does not need introduction, someone who has earned a place beyond chain of command, beyond decoration and ceremony, and yet walks without demand or expectation, asking for nothing but watching everything. He did not sit. He did not salute. He simply nodded once at the Admiral, who, after a pause, nodded back, like an answer to a question that had never been asked. Then the man turned toward the door again, his boots silent on the floor, yet somehow echoing in the bones of every man in that room. And just before stepping out, he stopped. Not for long, but long enough to shift the weight of the moment. He looked back, not at the officers, not at the screen or the mission brief, but at the new team seated at the edge of the room. The next generation, young lean faces still untouched by real loss or guilt, or the darkness that lives between seconds on the battlefield. And for a heartbeat they held his gaze, and though he said nothing, they felt it. Every one of them felt it like a warning, like a promise, like a challenge carved into silence. And then he was gone. No one followed, no one asked where he went or why, because they knew not to. They knew better than to chase a ghost that had chosen to walk among them one more time. And outside the hangar, the sun had started to fall behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the tarmac. And if someone had looked close enough, they might have seen him walking toward the edge of the base, toward a vehicle that wasn't on any manifest, toward a path not on any map, and maybe they would have noticed that the vehicle was already running, waiting, like it knew he was coming. Like it always did. Back inside the room, the Admiral sat down slowly and took a breath, his voice low but clear as he said, "Prepare the mission and make sure they understand what it means to earn silence, like that." And every man nodded because they did, because they had seen it in his eyes. And once you see that, you cannot forget it, you cannot fake it, and you cannot unlearn it. He had no rank, no ribbon, no record. But when he walked into a room full of the best operators in the world, they stood a little straighter, spoke a little softer, listened a little closer. Not because they feared him, but because they respected something in him. Something they could not name, but knew was real. Something that could not be taught or trained or bought. Only earned through years of doing the job when the job broke everyone else. And somewhere far from that hangar, from the noise and the lights and the medals, a man with no name drove into the dusk with a new mission in his pocket and a history written only in the eyes of those who survived. And when the night came, he did not stop, because men like him do not sleep. They do not rest. They do not retire. They just keep going into the dark. So the rest of us can stand in the light.